sentence? I'm all distracted today. What ends a punctuation? Thank you. I forgot to add the question mark punctuation because the sermon's title really is The End, question mark. So let me give you a roadmap of where we are going. First, we're going to read the passage, and then we're going to look at the nuts and the bolts of the passage. We're going to unpack what's going on. Secondly, we're going to do a little bit of biblical history, and we're going to understand from biblical history what this story really means. And finally, we're going to land in what this story really means for us. So with all of that said, I am in the book of Ruth, chapter 4. We're going to be in verse 9 to start. Picking up where Cooper left off last week, it says this. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion, and to Mahlon. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses of this today." All he did is saying, I am redeeming Ruth and Naomi and purchasing everything that they had. Verse 11, then all the people who were at the gate, they said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman, Ruth, who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily as an Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went in to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So there is our text this morning, and to catch us up on where we have been over these last 5 weeks, let me just refresh the story for you. Ruth is a Moabite. What that means is she is not an Israelite. She was not born in Israel. She is not of the people of Israel. She marries an Israelite who had fled a famine in the land of Israel. She marries him, and her father-in-law dies, and her husband dies, and her brother-in-law dies. She is now left with her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law says, "I am going back to Israel. There is food there. The Lord has provided again. I am going back. You ladies should stay." But Ruth says, "No, I will be with you till death do us part. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you sleep, I will sleep. Where you travel, I will travel." And Ruth journeys back. But just because she journeys back doesn't make it easy. When she gets back, she is seeking scraps left over by the harvesters, trying just to find anything she can to survive for Ruth and Naomi, her mother-in-law. She finds favor as she happens, it says, to get to the field of Boaz. And Boaz provides privilege and protection for Ruth as she is able to stay there through the whole harvest season. But the problem arises when harvest season ends because the food dries up. Ruth needs a long-term solution. And so they devise a plan, an incredible plan, an impossible plan, a plan that honestly makes no sense, a plan that has this poor widow foreigner proposing marriage to this rich Israelite man who owns the field she's been seeking the scraps from. And in this amazing story of God, he promises her that night at the threshing floor to redeem her. And last week, Cooper May unpacked that story of redemption and God's goodness through it. So we see today the marriage happens and the people are witness. When we think of the story of Ruth, here's what I want you to understand. This is not a story of luck. This is a story of sovereignty. What does that mean? This is God showing his hand, showing his power, bringing about his purposes in and through his own people. This is not, oh wow, how lucky of this little widow girl. She's one of 1,000. No, God has a purpose for this Moabite widow to be redeemed and to bring about redemption. The purposes of God are often fleshed out through people and all of their circumstances. Sometimes you and I miss the purposes of God because we're just looking at the circumstances. Sometimes we miss the forest around us because we're studying this piece of bark that's out of place. And we need to remember not just the struggles, but the successes. Not just the pains of life, but the pleasures of life. We need to be reminded that challenges happen, yes, but God has changed us as well. That there are struggles, but he has brought solutions. And we need to remember that. So with all of that said, let's just quickly unpack a little bit of this passage. Verse 11, the people say, to Ruth, may the Lord make the woman who's coming into the house like Rachel and Leah and build up the house of Israel. Two things I see from this. The people accept Ruth and they bless Ruth. The foreigner from a rival nation, the widow who is destitute, who would be looked down on by most in most cultures, is now accepted and blessed. See, she should have been ignored and overlooked, but she was included. She wasn't just allowed into a space, she was included by the people in that space. There's a lot of people who feel like an outsider, just like Ruth did. There's even some of those people in this room right now who you're allowed to be here, but you don't feel included while you are here. You're allowed to be in that room, but you're not included by the people in the room. They could have just said, yeah, that's fine, Ruth can exist, whatever. But not only do they allow her to exist, they pray for blessing upon her. And notice what the blessing is. That she be like Rachel and Leah. Do you know what's special about Rachel and Leah? They were the wives of Jacob that brought about them and their handmaids, that brought about the 12 tribes of Israel. They were the moms of Gad and Issachar, of Judah, of Asher. They were the matriarchs of Israel, and this is what they are praying for Ruth to be. Not only is she just accepted, but they're praying that a dynasty may come from her. I'm sure that hit Ruth pretty strongly. Up until this point, from everything that we can tell, she was childless. She had been married for 10 years during prime childbearing years, but she was childless. In a day where you wanted to have a son to be your heir, to continue the line, it was an embarrassing mark on who you are as a person to not have a son, but especially to not have a child. When Ruth is hearing this statement over her, I'm sure she is saying, yes, that's what I've longed for forever. Not just to be a mom, but to have an heir. They prayed for a similar thing over Boaz in verse 12. May your house be like the house of Perez. And we're going to talk about who Perez and Tamar and Judah are in just a few moments. But again, they are praying, may you be a notable family in the lineage and in the history of Israel. And then in verse 13, things happen quickly, don't they? Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went into her, and she conceived and bore a son. It's God working again in the story of Ruth. We only see the name of the Lord mentioned twice in the whole book of Ruth. Once in verse 6 of chapter 1, where it says the Lord had sent food to Israel. And now, here in verse 13, and the Lord gave her conception. We cannot deny that God has been working throughout the whole story. But here, purposefully, we see people recognizing the hand of the Lord working. And the womb, like that of Sarah and that of Rebekah and that of Rachel, was opened up and a son was born. The prayer was answered in the very immediate future. Verses 14 through 17 focus on Naomi and just reminding her that though she has been through so much, that God has blessed her by providing her a daughter who is more important or more valuable than 7 sons, and continues the lineage. And honestly, it feels like, and Kendall will throw this up, it feels like the end. It feels like the Roadrunner got away, right? It feels like Pepe Le Pew, which I think he'd be canceled today, is kissing his bride. It feels like, they're walking off in the Western and this pops up, that the day was saved, the end. I mean, all is right. All is redeemed. Honestly, the writer should just wrote, happily ever after, you would think. But we get a bit of bonus material in the book of Ruth that I haven't read yet. Verses 18 through 22. And that's really where we're going to sit for the rest of the day. Verses 18 through 22. You may think it's boring, but we're going to make it come alive, hopefully. Now these were the generations of Perez. Remember, this is who they prayed for the house of Boaz to be like. They probably think of him because this is from the tribe of Judah, and so they would know these people. This would be their lineage. These are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered, you can go Salmon or Salmon. I don't know. I think of it as Salmon in the Bible, but salmon when I go to a restaurant. I'm not sure which one it is. Yolanda will give me some thoughts. She's over there shaking her head at me. So don't judge me if my Alabama comes out and I call him Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. 10 names are given as we end this. 5, they are pretty sure were before Egyptian captivity, Perez to Egyptian captivity, and then there's this gap, and then there's 5 listed post-Egyptian captivity as we get to David. Now, I want to pick out 3 significant names from that. Because you know what I realized one day? It was like a week and a half ago. I know more people in the lineage of Jesus than I do in my own lineage. Like, I don't know my great-grandfather. Like, I think I may have met him, but I don't know my great-great-grandfather for sure. And many of you are probably in a very similar boat. I don't have a clue where my family was just 150 years ago. And I think many of you would probably answer the same. But as we see this beautiful lineage, we're going to see some really cool things pop out. So let's tell the story of Perez. So Perez shows up. And let me just tell you, Perez's story is wilder than Ruth's, okay? Perez's story is wilder than Ruth's. Read about it. Genesis chapter 38. If you have your notes today or whatever, earmark it, write it down. Genesis 38. Let me tell you the story. There is this man named Judah. Yes, the tribe of Judah. Him, Judah. He has 3 sons. He marries a Canaanite woman, and then she has 3 sons for him. This son marries this woman named Tamar. Okay? So now you have Tamar married to the oldest son of Judah, but Tamar's husband was a wicked man, and God kills him. As the custom of the day, Tamar is to marry and have a child with the second son of Judah. But the second son of Judah hated Tamar, and he would not impregnate her. It reads as if he would use her, but chose not to impregnate her. He is also killed because he is a wicked man. There's a third son of Judah, but he says, he is too young to marry you, Tamar. And really he's thinking, I don't want my third son to marry this black widow, right? I'm not putting it up with this anymore. She's cursed. We're staying away from Tamar. So he says, go and wait at your own home in your father's house, and when he gets old enough, he can marry you, with no intention. She learns of this plot, and she hears one day, many years later, that Judah was making his way to her town. So you know what she does? She dresses up like a prostitute, goes to the road, and she is chosen by Judah. They have a one-night stand, which leads to her becoming pregnant. Now, everybody in town is judging Tamar for getting pregnant. This widow who was supposed to be waiting is now pregnant, and Judah even calls her in to stone her, to have her killed. He says, send her here when he finds out about it. She walks in, and she's been waiting for this day because that one night stand, she took a piece of his property. I think it was a ring. I cannot remember exactly, but I think she took his ring. She walks in where he is ready to kill her. And she says, but first, let me show you the man who did this. And he declares, you are more righteous than I. From that one night stand of Tamar and Judah, twins are born. Perez and Zerah. The line that God is bringing includes an incestuous relationship from a lying father-in-law and a deceiving Canaanite daughter-in-law. This is a shocking line that God would be focused on. And what we see is that God works even through human sinfulness to bring about glorious endings. But this isn't the only shocking line. The next person I want you to see in the line that we're looking at here at the end of Ruth is Boaz. And we know a lot about Boaz. He's a worthy man, a good man, a wealthy man, a man that we want to look up to. He's the son of Salmon, but in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, we learn a little bit extra about him. He is the son of Salmon, who was married to Rahab. Rahab, the prostitute in Jericho. Rahab, who lied and hid the spies of Israel. Rahab, the only person who was saved when the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. Rahab is the mother of Boaz. Is that why he has a soft spot in his heart for Ruth, this Moabite, this foreigner? Because he knew how challenging it was for his mom to be accepted and included in. That his mom, when she put her faith in God, was fully accepted, and her salvation on that battle of Jericho came because of her faith. Through the line of Perez and through the line of Boaz leads to the person of David. And you may think of him as King David, but you know what? His dad didn't think of him as King David. His dad had Samuel the prophet showing up to anoint this new king, and he said, "No, David, you don't even have to bother coming in. Why don't you just stay out in the field and watch over the sheep?" Have you seen Eliab? He's tall, dark, and handsome. He's strong. He's the one. And Samuel even goes, "Yeah, he's the one." And God says, No, he's not my king. So they parade 6 brothers in front of Samuel, and God says, No. And then the runt of the family is brought in. And God says, he is the one. The man after my own heart. The man that I have chosen. I don't look on the outside, but I look on the inside. And he is going to be the one that leads my people and changes our nation. From the shocking line of Perez and the shocking line of Boaz and Rahab and the shocking line of David, the runt, God is working. And if you flip to Matthew chapter 1, it tells that story. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac fathered Jacob. Jacob fathered Judah and his brothers. And Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. It goes on and picks up and then jumps down to Salmon fathered Boaz and by Ruth. And Boaz fathered Obed by Ruth. And Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. And David fathered Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And then if you jump all the way down to verse 16 of chapter 1 of Matthew, Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. This is the lineage of Jesus. God uses a Canaanite deceiver, a prostitute in Jericho, a Moabite widow, an overlooked son, an adulterous affair, and a poor widow to bring about the Redeemer of the world. And this Redeemer comes in a surprising way, not born in a palace but a stable. Not born with fanfare and expectation. They actually say, what good can come from Nazareth? And yet redemption is brought to us through the messy line of Rahab and Tamar and Judah and Ruth and Bathsheba and Mary. This isn't how we would script it, but God's plans are bigger than ours. As we reflect on the powerful stories that we have looked at, of Ruth's loyalty, of Tamar's boldness, of Rahab's faith, of David's anointing and purity of heart, we remember that God's work, though, is not reserved solely to those who are perfect, but God uses what is dented and blemished and broken and sinful to bring about his glorious plan of redemption for all people, that he always is working and that no one is disqualified, that the Messiah comes through this line of brokenness to bring about grace. So what do we do with this story? Because this story extends to us. Because the redemption of Ruth sets us up to understand the redemption that Jesus brings us. That we are beloved. That we are set free. That we are his child. And that he is our good Father. The first thing that I have as a takeaway is this: the plan of God will not be thwarted by men. The plan of God will not be thwarted by men. God has a plan, and even when it seems impossible to happen, we remember that all things are possible through Him. That He is working at the right time in the right way to bring about the right results, even through the sinfulness of us, even through our obedience and our disobedience. God is always working. Through the sinful desires of Judah for a prostitute and David for a woman, for another man's wife, God brings about redemption. Oftentimes, you and I feel like we have disqualified ourselves from being loved by God, or being a part of His family, because of what we have done, what we have said, where we have been. But hear this very clearly. You cannot disqualify yourself from what you never qualified yourself for. You cannot lose what you never earned. You didn't create your own salvation. It never rested on how good you are. It always rested on how good Jesus is. And so when you feel hopeless, that you ruined your chance, that you wasted your opportunity, that you did what is unforgivable, remember these stories of God's mercy and grace and forgiveness that extends to you, because they're just as messed up as you are. God's plans cannot be thwarted. And the second thing that I see in this is God's plan is often unexpected, but is always good. If we were writing the story of the lineage of Jesus, I think we would avoid the bumps in the road. I think we would avoid the stories of barren wives trying to produce heirs. I think we wouldn't make Abraham wait 25 years because we'd worry that he'd still trust us. And yet this is the story of God. And here's the point of His stories. They always point to only God can. Only God can do this. We see monarchs, we see princes, we see kings, but only God could write a story like this. There's very few people we would even want to trade lives with. Abraham, a serial liar and waiting that long. Moses, a murderer and then doing off in kind of the middle of nowhere for 40 years. David, conspiring, or really, is convicted of murder and is an adulterer. Solomon has everything and all the wisdom, and yet what does he do with it? He cannot render any self-control. The plan of God often involves redemption and restoration and recovery and rescue and renewal. This is the story that God weaves. And guess what? Your story is going to have the same things. Your story involves redemption. Your story needs restoration. Your story is a story of recovery, of rescue, of renewal, because you are a messed up individual, way worse than you ever want to admit. And your story is probably not what you scripted. You probably didn't have on your 10 years from now bingo card that you'd be in a deep depressive state. You probably didn't have on that same card that you would be at that job still, or that you wouldn't be without a job, or that you would be without a job. You weren't expecting to be single at this age, or to be denied being a mother, or to lose a child, or to be a widow. You probably weren't expecting or desiring to be debilitated by illness or feeling completely lonely, and yet this is the story. The story of God is often unexpected, but it is always good. The plans of God often involve redemption and recovery and rescue and renewal and restoration. The question is not, are you going to experience trials and sufferings and struggles? The question is, where are you going to look in the trials and the sufferings and the struggles? Are you going to look to yourself and try with all of your might? Or do you have a big enough God that you can look to Him and that He can handle it? That you can look to God in rich or poor, in sickness and in health, in sorrow and success, in want and abundance? Is your God big enough in all of those circumstances to still be good? Your ignorance in this moment doesn't mean He's ignorant of the moment. He is always working. The story of Ruth is the story of God, working through obedience and disobedience to bring apart His purposes and His plans to us. Ruth's story ends with a wedding and a baby, but her legacy extends to the Messiah, to the Redeemer. The redeemed one is in the lineage of the Redeemer. God didn't just restore Ruth and Naomi. He used them to bring about restoration for the world. The foreign widow becomes part of the royal line in a story only God could script. Jesus, I'll end with maybe this statement. Jesus came from outsiders for outsiders, like you and me. Ruth, Rahab, Tamar, Mary, Bathsheba are all outsiders and yet are included in to the family of God. Friends, today as we have Father's Day and we think about family, I want you to consider, are you in the family of God? And do you know that He is a good Father? I'll use this example another time, but it's on my mind, so I'm sharing it right now. Cooper, this week, he was laying in his bed at the beach, and he doesn't have a television in his room at home, but he does here. And I walked into his room, and I said, "Hey, we need to turn the TV off." And he said, "Dad," or no, sorry, I mistold the story. The next day, I trusted him to turn it off. The next day he came to me and he said this. He said, "Dad, I want to let you know, I watched 2 minutes more television than you told me I could." And then he said this line. He said, "But I knew you would forgive me." Is that the picture of God that you have? A picture of a God that you know will forgive you. And so you can go to Him and admit, confess, but also believe that He will forgive you. That's the Father that we talk about every Sunday.